Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. It's all God's will. You can die in your sleep, and God can spare you in battle. God is the same everywhere. Nothing is so necessary for a young man as the company of intelligent women. There is no greatness where there is not simplicity, goodness, and truth. You can love a person dear to you with a human love, but an enemy can only be loved with divine love. Man cannot possess anything as long as he fears death. But to him who does not fear it, everything belongs. If there was no suffering, man would not know his limits, would not know himself. Nothing, wrote Tolstoy, can make our life, or the lives of other people, more beautiful than perpetual kindness. Ivan Illich's life had been most simple and most ordinary, and therefore most terrible. Because of the self-confidence with which he had spoken, no one could tell whether what he said was very clever or very stupid. Man cannot possess anything as long as he fears death. But to him who does not fear it, everything belongs. The whole world is divided for me into two parts. One is she, and there is all happiness, hope, light. The other is where she is not, and there is dejection and darkness. Yes, love, but not the love that loves for something, to gain something, or because of something, but that love that I felt for the first time, when dying, I saw my enemy and yet loved him. Human science fragments everything in order to understand it, kills everything in order to examine it. We are asleep until we fall in love. If we admit that human life can be ruled by reason, then all possibility of life is destroyed. If there was no suffering, man would not know his limits, would not know himself. Someone dear to one can be loved with human love, but an enemy can only be loved with divine love. Pierre was right when he said that one must believe in the possibility of happiness in order to be happy, and I now believe in it. Let the dead bury the dead, but while I'm alive, I must live and be happy. I simply want to live, to cause no evil to anyone but myself. Everything I know because of love. I knew that feeling of love which is the essence of the soul, for which no object is needed. It is as if I had been going downhill while I imagined I was going up. And that is really what it was. I was going up in public opinion, but to the same extent life was ebbing away from me. And now it is all done, and there is only death. Maybe I did not live as I ought to have done, it suddenly occurred to him. But how could that be, when I did everything properly, he replied, and immediately dismissed from his mind this, the sole solution of all the riddles of life and death, as something quite impossible. Suddenly some force struck him in the chest and side, making it still harder to breathe, and he fell through the hole, and there at the bottom was a light. Just then his schoolboy son had crept softly in and gone up to the bedside. The dying man was still screaming desperately and waving his arms. His hand fell on the boy's head, and the boy caught it, pressed it to his lips, and began to cry. The preparations for marriage and the beginning of married life, with its conjugal caresses, the new furniture, new crockery, and new linen, were very pleasant until his wife became pregnant. But from the first months of his wife's pregnancy, something new, unpleasant, depressing, and unseemly, and from which there was no way of escape, unexpectedly showed itself. He was much changed and grown even thinner since Pyotr Ivanovich had last seen him, but, as is always the case with the dead, his face was handsomer and above all more dignified than when he was alive. And in imagination he began to recall the best moments of his pleasant life. But strange to say, none of those best moments of his pleasant life now seemed at all what they had then seemed. The expression on his face seemed to say that what had needed to be done had been done, and done right. Beside this, his expression also seemed to hold warning, a reproach to the living. He suffered ever the same unceasing agonies, and in his loneliness pondered always on the same insoluble question: what is this? Can it be that it is death? And the inner voice answered, yes, it is death. There, in childhood, there had been something really pleasant with which it would be possible to live if it could return. But the child who had experienced that happiness existed no longer. It was like a reminiscence of somebody else. The pleasures connected with his work were pleasures of ambition. His social pleasures were those of vanity. But Ivan Illich's greatest pleasure was playing bridge. So that's what it is, he suddenly exclaimed aloud. What joy! If everyone fought for their own convictions, there would be no war. She hardly knew at times what it was she feared, and what she hoped for. Whether she feared or desired what had happened or what was going to happen and exactly what she longed for, she could not have said. It's hard to love a woman and do anything. It's much better to do good in a way that no one knows anything about it. The strongest of all warriors are these two, time and patience. We can know only that we know nothing. And that is the highest degree of human wisdom. A man on a 1,000-mile walk has to forget his goal and say to himself every morning, today I'm going to cover 25 miles and then rest up and sleep. Love those that hate you, but to love those one hates is impossible. I think, if it is true that there are as many minds as there are heads, then there are as many kinds of love as there are hearts. I've always loved you, and when you love someone, you love the whole person, just as he or she is, and not as you would like them to be. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. If you look for perfection, you will never be satisfied.